Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video we're going to talk about an emulator that appeared last week and then, almost immediately, nobody seemed to mention it again. I'm talking about the so-called Sudachi Reborn. Over the past few days, I've been testing this project more thoroughly to understand exactly what it has to offer and whether there's actually any reason to use it right now. I'll show you my first impressions, the difficulties I ran into during testing, the issues that appeared while running games, and most importantly, answer an important question: can it actually offer anything beyond recent projects like Eden, Citron Neo, or even the current Ryujinx? That's what we'll find out right after a word from today's sponsors. If you want to buy original games while saving a lot, check out Instant Gaming, the digital store that sells games for various platforms, such as PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo Switch. Get games of all genres with discounts of up to 95%. You'll also find a variety of gift cards and credits for other services. You can pay for your order through your credit card on a website with a 4.7 rating on Trustpilot. You're buying games directly from Instant Gaming, not from other retailers. If you encounter any issues, Instant Gaming offers 24/7 support. What are you waiting for to save? Links in the description. Before we get into the tests, let's talk a little about the project itself. Basically, not much has been revealed about it. But according to speculation, the developer is supposedly a Brazilian who has previously been involved with other emulation projects. If it really is the person many people suspect, he claimed that his project would outperform any other user-based emulator. That statement alone got me pretty excited, but as you'll see shortly, things didn't exactly turn out the way they were presented. If you enjoy this kind of content, where emulator performance is shown honestly and without any sugarcoating, make sure to leave a like. And if this is your first time on the channel, consider subscribing so you don't miss any future content. As the name suggests, the project is based on Sudachi. The problem is that even back when Sudachi was at its peak, it was never the highest performing emulator and often lagged behind Citron in many games. Speaking specifically about Sudachi Reborn, the first issue is that it's still locked to firmware 19. That means you won't be able to run some newer games or certain updates that add extra features, such as additional language options in games like Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. Another problem is how the builds are distributed. The developer apparently wants to remain anonymous, so there is no official Discord, GitHub repository, or public source. Right now, the only way to obtain new builds is through third parties, since everything is hosted on archive.org. I can share the version I use for testing with those interested, but following future updates will likely be difficult. There's also something I consider a bit questionable. We're talking about software based on open source code, yet the source code itself isn't available. I know other emulators have done similar things in the past, but it inevitably creates distrust. Without access to the source code, there's no way to know exactly what has been modified or verify whether anything malicious has been added. I'm not saying there's malware in the project, but that uncertainty will always exist as long as the code remains closed. I understand why modern emulator developers want to stay as far away from Nintendo's radar as possible, but I don't think abandoning the fundamental principles of open source software is the right approach. Other projects manage to keep their developers anonymous without sacrificing code transparency, such as the old Torza project. Another thing I noticed was some incompatibility with mods that normally work fine on other emulators. Several simply stopped working in this version. On the other hand, overall compatibility seems slightly above average in certain scenarios. Shadow Generations, for example, is a game that constantly suffers from regressions in modern emulators, yet here it worked perfectly throughout my testing without any crashes. So let's summarize the main positives and negatives. On the positive side, I'd highlight reasonably good overall compatibility, provided you're not trying to run very recent games. There is also a noticeable reduction in VRM usage, which in some scenarios exceeded 2 GB. In certain cases, I also observed a slight reduction in RAM consumption, something inherited from the original Sudachi. On the negative side, we have incompatibility with newer games, closed and unavailable source code that hurts the project's credibility, difficulty finding new builds, the absence of an official community, complete developer anonymity, and shader compilation that is noticeably slower than what is currently available in both Eden and Citron. So if you'd like to try it and trust the project, I'll leave a link available. Unfortunately, I can't promise ongoing coverage of future updates since I also depend on third parties to access new builds. Now let's move on to the tests. All tests were performed at 1080p using the exact same mods and settings that I normally use when testing Eden. The first game was Bayonetta 3. Overall, performance is good and the emulator manages to maintain 60 FPS for much of the gameplay. However, because it inherits Sudachi's shader compilation system, which is slower than both Citron and the current Eden, the amount of stuttering is significantly higher. In fact, the 1% low dropped all the way to 0 FPS during shader compilation. On the other hand, VRAM usage does seem noticeably lower. Although the emulator was using over 8 GB during recording, my usual setup consumes around 10 GB due to the large number of installed mods. Saving roughly 2 GB of VRAM can be extremely useful for users with lower memory graphics cards. Pokémon Legends Z-A also produced some interesting results. I didn't encounter the graphical bugs that some users still report in Eden on certain GPUs. If you're experiencing those issues, it may be worth testing Sudachi Reborn for comparison. Overall, gameplay was stable, even while using a 60 FPS patch and 4K shadow resolution. Shadow Generations was another highlight. This game has always had a complicated history in emulation. One update fixes problems, and the next brings crashes back. Here, at least during my testing, the game worked normally. Gameplay was stable, crash-free, and maintained consistent performance. Tears of the Kingdom, however, delivered results well below expectations. In the Kakariko Village benchmark, where I normally remain above 70 FPS, performance dropped to around 40 FPS in multiple situations. During regular gameplay outside the benchmark, the same pattern continued. In many cases, the game hovered around 40 FPS, a result I haven't seen since the days of the original Yuzu. Comparing directly against Eden using the same hardware and settings, the first test was Bayonetta 3. Sudachi Reborn achieved an average of 61 FPS, while Eden reached 94 FPS. That means Eden delivered roughly 54% higher performance in this scenario. As for VRAM usage, Sudachi consumed approximately 7.3 GB compared to Eden's 9.1 GB. So the VRAM savings are definitely real. RAM usage differences, however, were practically insignificant in this particular game. In Tears of the Kingdom, the gap was even larger. Sudachi averaged just 42 FPS, while Eden reached 73 FPS. That's an advantage of roughly 74% in favor of Eden. It's also worth remembering that newer firmware versions often bring performance improvements of around 10% to 15% in certain scenarios, something I've tested before. Because of that, remaining stuck on firmware 19 becomes yet another disadvantage for the project. In the VRM tests, the difference was relatively small. However, once again, Sudachi showed a noticeable reduction in RAM usage, approaching 2 GB of savings at certain moments. And those were the results. Honestly, the claim that the project would outperform other Yuzu forks simply didn't hold up on my hardware. Perhaps the developer performed optimization specifically for his own machine, or maybe the statement was a bit exaggerated. Overall, unless you're facing a very specific issue in another emulator, I can't recommend Sudachi Reborn at this time. Right now, for me, Eden remains the best available option. Before ending the video, I'd like to thank and immortalize all channel members. If you enjoy this type of content and would like to support the work being done here, consider becoming a member or supporting through Patreon so your name can also be featured in future videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.